Nobody's coming out on this.
Yeah, it's supposed to snow or something.
Yeah, that's what I hear. Hello, everybody. Here we are. It's midterm. No. It's. I think it should be midterm because I can't believe that the term has gone by so quickly. But here it is, final exam time. And so let's just jump in. This is what you need to know for the final exam. So away we go. First thing, of course, is it's a final exam review tonight. And what do you need to know? It's pretty much like it was during the midterm. You've got 1 week to do it. And it starts on Thursday, and it runs through the following Thursday. Now, I do want to emphasize this. I emphasize this because, everybody on the planet will be taking final exams at this time. This is the final exam period. And so do check for the office hours or the hours of operation, I guess, for the testing lab, which is where you will, of course, take it, just as you did for the midterm. But get in there and take it early, and it sounds intimidating tonight, what the weather people are telling us, so it could very easily be that there will be inclement weather during this testing time, so it's really to your benefit to take this exam early. Okay, let me also emphasize at this point that the exam does close early on Thursday. Like I say, there's everybody on the planet here at the Planet LCC is going to be taking this exam. They do close early on Thursday, so just check the hours of operation and get in there as quickly as you can and take the test, and it's all done. There'll be no makeup exams like last time. And again, I'm emphasizing, check the Saturday hours. And what is on the exam? Exactly like it was before. There will be 50 objective questions. Okay, so the exam pretty much resembles what you took during the midterm. And that's pretty much it. So when you put it all together, you will have answered 100 questions about understanding movies. So yes, before I just walk away from this, the study guide is now available on Moodle. You might notice that it's a little bit different from the previous one. That's because I decided just to be nice for a change and to say Merry Christmas. That's all I have to say about that, so there. The photo, remember, another requirement here, photo ID is required. You're still stuck with just one 3x5 note card. I'm just kind of repeating myself, but it's for review because we've already gone through this for the midterm. And just be sure and check and verify the hours of the testing labs so you're not left out in the cold. And in this particular case, as we are right now, it might be very literally in the cold. Extra credit. Okay, if you're going to turn in extra credit, I need it by December 10th. That's a week from tomorrow. It's due. The deadline for it is 10 o'clock or 10:30 in the morning. And you can, and it's probably the best thing to do right now, is to email your extra credit to me. If you're going to send me an old-fashioned style paper, I've got to have it postmarked no later than December 6th. But the deadline is 10:30, a week from tomorrow, and if it comes in after that, sorry, it didn't come in. Okay, so we've talked about all of these things, and we want to know, okay, what is being covered on the exam? It's everything from the combat film through The Edge of Hollywood, which is going on this week. So it's roughly, again, as I mentioned way back when we started, that it's half the term. It's the second half of the term. So also in the middle of all of that, we'll talk about film noir, film in the television age, and so forth. So let's take a look at what was talked about with regard to the combat war film. Again, they refer to it as the combat film. Everybody else calls it a war film. But here we are, the features of the genre as explained by our video series. Remember that, number one, laws and morality are suspended when it comes time to go to war. They switch, or our films now, switch from the individual to the group, and essentially to the troops. And this is in direct opposition to what was celebrated in the Western. If you'll recall, in the Western genre, the individual is important. But in the war film, the combat film, what's important is the group. And it's nice to see how that functions, because when we talk about an icon, an iconic figure of the war film, it's the same fellow that we talk about with an iconic figure about the Western, and that is John Wayne. So John Wayne is the rugged individual in the Western, but he becomes the advocate for the group in the war film. And I'm going to keep calling it the war film because that's the way I was taught. And number three, women as emotional element that brings out male vulnerability. I think that the prima facie evidence of that is in the film The Sands of Iwo Jima, with, again, with John Wayne, which is very much a masculine film, and he encounters a woman in a bar that changes his character quite radically. I mean, he is the tough as nails, hard-nosed, you know, sergeant striker who, you know, go out and do the job, and he has very little sympathy for anybody. But he meets this woman just before they go off to combat, and follows her home and finds out that she's more or less selling herself so that she can have milk for her baby. So she and the baby bring out his vulnerability, and he gets changed. And it's an excellent film. Okay, the combat war film also is noted, or what they talked about here, are the anti-war sentiments and the post-war films. It's quite a change in the way films are made with regard to war when the war ends, because you have the films made during the war are pretty much propaganda, as we'll see in a moment, for the home front, saying, you know, support the troops. We're in it, you know, until it's over there, kind of a thing. And yet when they come back, when the war's over and everyone comes back, they start making films that question a lot of things. And certainly they question the role that the soldier must play now that he's no longer a soldier and he comes home. And now what does he do? And especially those who suffer from physical ailments and those who suffer from what they call today PTSD, which they called back then shell shock. And so they begin to examine that. And that's when you get Wyler's film, The Best Years of Our Lives, and that sort of thing. Also Stanley Kramer's film, The Men, which is also part of the second point here, that war films and portrayal of racial integration of armed forces. In Kramer's film, The Men, racial integration is very much a part of that, of the drama. And we got to move on. The combat war film, the fundamental American philosophy or ideology embedded in American war films is this: we may not always win physically, but we are always right ideologically. So it pretty much promotes the whole idea of Americanism. And with the films made during the war, it was essential that they did that. Otherwise, why bother to fight? And so just keep in mind that they harped on that in the video series, that we may not always win a physical battle, a physical war, but we are always right ideologically. which then brings us right up to the Office of War Information. A lot of time was spent on that, and they did an excellent job on that because this is the role of the U.S. government in Hollywood film production. The Office of War Information was set up to essentially do what it says in number 1. It was propaganda and shaping public opinion. It's essentially what it did. There were many independent and independent in the sense that the government financed the films, such as Why We Fight, which was shown mostly to soldiers. I still think those films were shown to the public. I may be wrong, but I know that they were essentially kind of training films for the Army and the armed forces. But anyway, the Why We Fight series, which were all about shaping public opinion, that this is why we go to war. There's a reason for going to war. And then the second part of that is the Sergeant York formula, which depicts the conversion of a conscientious objector to a supporter of the war. Gary Cooper made a very important film in the early 1940s called Sergeant York, which was the story of the most decorated soldier of World War I. And in that film, which was made for World War II audiences, you see Sergeant York objecting to everything there is about war and being a reluctant combatant, and then his experiences change his attitude, and he becomes a supporter of the war. That gambit was used in 1968, as you see here, by John Wayne when he made The Green Berets. It was pretty gutsy of John Wayne. He bankrolled that movie in the middle of all the Vietnam protests, and in all of that, and in the middle of it, here comes The Green Berets. And John Wayne used the story, the Sergeant York formula, and the film was rather successful at the box office. Of course, critics hated it because they thought it was simple-minded. And of course, the anti-war group hated it. But it was John Wayne's effort of trying to elevate the public, and apparently it worked for a lot of the public because it was rather successful at the box office. Okay, we move on to film noir, which is a French term which means black film. It gets that name, black film, from the fact that the films that the French were talking about here were shot in black and white. That's part of what makes it the film. Secondly, it was shot at night, and I'm going to bring those up in a minute. And thirdly, they were pretty dark films. They were far from being optimistic. They were rather the pessimistic films. They started with adaptations of American pulp fiction and hard-boiled novels. Now, what it was just a series of films made. No one set out to say, well, let's make a new genre, we're going to call it film noir. No, it was filmmakers that just adapted those novels and pulp fiction stories and made a series of films. And they began, again, to just imitate each other. So you had a kind of style that was present. And that always raises the question, is film noir a true genre? If you talk about the way a film looks, Citizen Kane would be called film noir. The emphasis on light and shadow, which we'll talk about in a moment. Again, it's discovered and debuted in post-war France. What that means is they discovered it, and this notion of it being a collection of films, a collective, is because of the French and writing in Cahiers du Cinéma and all of these young French film critics seeing something in these films. Well, what was it that they saw? Well, the first thing that they saw was the settings. These are films that are always set in the city. They're set in major metropolitan areas. They're not set in hometown America. They're not set in the tiny little villages and communities and things like that where a lot of other films are set. But instead, they're set in the middle of a town, or I mean a city, and part of that is the city almost becomes a character. And it has a lot of influence on the characters. Now, in that city, it's always rain-slick streets. That's another thing that they saw in this. I mean, the film is always shot at night, and it's usually got a lot of rain-slick streets so that you get real nice images. And it's set in the sleazy side of city life. This is not a place where you go at night if you want to, if you value your life. This is a place that, like I say, the city itself is a character and can be very much a villain. There were themes that they discovered, and essentially the two themes are alienation and existentialism. The characters are always alienated from each other and from society. They're alienated from the town, or I keep calling it a town. Got to check that. It's the city. We'll make it for certain here. It's the city that's the character here, not small town. And although in some cases the character is very much part of that city, and it's the city itself that alienates everyone else. And as far as existentialism is concerned, it is just simply that notion of no exit, that you can't get out of it. Once you're there, you're there. And nothing you can do is going to change it. What are the character types that these French critics found? Well, the bullet number 3 is the primary one, is there are usually a lot of private detectives in this, not police agencies. We don't have a hero who works for the police department, who works for authority. Instead, he works for himself. He's a private detective, and so he gets away with a lot. He can beat a confession out of somebody. These private detectives are often, probably universal, they are antisocial loners. They're isolated, part of that alienation thing. They have no one they can trust, and if they do have one they trust, they sometimes question whether or not that they should be trusting that person. And often that's a girlfriend, like Sam Spade and his secretary. And in many cases, we have amnesiacs. We have people that can't remember where they've been, why they're doing things, what's going on. One of my all-time favorite, there are two favorite film noirs in my world that I love. One is called Black Angel, which was made by Roy William Neill in 1946. And the whole thing is, it's based on, again, on a great novel by Cornell Woolrich. And it's, the hero has no idea where he's been, what he's doing, or anything. It is such, as we follow this movie, as it develops, we're finding out the same thing that he's finding out about himself, where he's been, and it's like, I did that? Kind of a thing. And my other favorite is a very inexpensive B movie, very cheap, called Detour, made by Producers Releasing Corporation. And Detour is only run 60 minutes. It's very cheap, like I say. It was directed by Edgar G. Ulmer. And again, the guy doesn't know he hasn't a clue what's going on. Where's he been? And in both cases, these films are told in flashback, which was a favorite thing for film noir. Okay, the style. This is the thing I think more than anything that impressed the French critics, and that is the way these films looked. You have low-key lighting. You have shadowy elements. You have strange highlights. It's like there's a film that Robert Siodmak made called Christmas Holiday, which sounds very much like, oh yeah, a wonderful Christmas movie. No, it's a film noir with Gene Kelly as a mad killer. And I mean, really, working against casting here, Gene Kelly's a killer, and it's Deanna Durbin, the sweetheart, who is the victim. And anyway, Siodmak lights that film in such a way that you only, a shadow goes across the center part of your face. So you see one eye and you see the mouth as he's confronting her. And so that's what I mean about the strange highlights. Or I talked earlier about Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane has very much this film style in it. And if you've seen the film, you know that the reporter, Thompson, we never see him. We never see his face. He is, and when you think about it, he is our primary character. He is our number one character. Everything that we know about Citizen Kane is being filtered through Thompson. And yet we never see his face. We have no idea what he looks like. And when we do see it as sort of an objective camera angle on that, where Thompson is talking to somebody, he's always in a shadow. Very effective of Wells. And then lastly, extreme camera angles. Again, that's part of Wells. High and low angles, distortion. It's what they call a Dutch angle, where things are just off kilter a bit. We tilt the camera like this, and so you're looking at the strain, the features on someone's face is kind of exaggerated because the camera is exaggerated. And it might be also because you have a very wide angle on that, which distorts that image. And this is what the French critics saw and began to say, well, this is all what we call film noir. Also, what they find and what we see with these is the production code in film noir. Film noir often alluded to prohibited subjects without directly violating the code. As I mentioned, well, I haven't mentioned it yet. Okay, gender issues in film noir, women as femme fatales. The femme fatale part of this is that these women are tough. They are really super tough. I mean, they're above and beyond tough. And that's what you see in Detour. He is a victim. I mean, it's almost like roles are reversed in a Hollywood film. The woman is tough, and she's a criminal. The woman's tough, and she has the man by the throat. Notice I said throat. I should say something else, which gives you a better image, a better description of what's happening. But she is in control. The same thing in Black Angel. The same thing. She controls our guy that's totally full of our amnesiac main character, and she controls everything that he does. So part of this is also the sexuality that's involved, and they get away with this. Why? Who knows? But they got away with a lot of it because if you watch some film noir, especially films made in the late 40s like that, and you look at it and you'll go, I wonder how they got away with that, when you think of what the production code was all about. Okay, so summarizing this is film noir is a social commentary on post-war reality. It's on modern mass American culture. It's on consumerism and disillusionment with Paradise Lost. So essentially, it's a very dark film, and it doesn't exactly celebrate Americanism, but instead it questions it and says, golly gee whiz, is it really worth it? I mean, look what it does to us. And also, I think I can add to this is, what does the city do? What does that, they like to title films like The Concrete Jungle. You know, that kind of, what does it do? And it is like a jungle. All right, we got to move on here. Film and the television age. There's a post-war decline in attendance. And there's the threat of television. But remember, we emphasize this. Television is not the only culprit. There's more leisure time. There's more money. There's interest in other activities. And there is a sudden migration from those evil cities to the suburbs. With regard to TV, the motion picture industry and TV reach an agreement that TV becomes a subsidiary market for motion pictures. It starts pretty much with Disney. Disney sells out to television. And the reason he sells out to television is because ABC will pay for Disneyland, and that's what he wants. And he sells out to it, and next thing you know, so do all the other studios, because it finds out, boy, we can make a lot of money on this. The movie industry's response to competition from television and decline in attendance, it's really technical innovations. We go from what they call in the industry the flat image, which is essentially your old-style television, to a wide screen. The big wide screen occurs in the early 50s with Cinerama, which allows you to see things out of the corner of your eye. It's peripheral vision. And then also in 53, they start throwing things at you. It's 3D. And you go to a 3D movie, and even if you went to a 3D movie and you saw it without 3D, if you just went to see a movie and you didn't know it was in 3D, and by the time you left the theater, you'd say, either that movie should have been in 3D or it was in 3D, because you've got these interesting camera angles where things are just being thrown at you all the time. And then it settled in on CinemaScope, and then later perfected by Panavision. You should know the technical modifications that we had to deal with regard to TV. The panning and scanning of CinemaScope films and the letterboxing, which came later, and recognize what they call the safe action area and so forth. Okay, and also the creative innovations by independent producers. What they also came up with was AIP, and which is American International Pictures, and the teen market. Discovered that teenagers were going or flooding theaters in the 1950s. That was the market, was teenagers and monsters. Never before did we have as many monsters from outer space, from inner space, from across the street, from anywhere, were showing up in the 1950s, and usually they were attacking teenagers. Okay. Then the film school generation. There's a transition in the 1960s. The older generation, which went to movies and saw sex films like Rock Hudson and Doris Day movies, to the end of the decade, where the younger generation went to see film and see a sex film like The Graduate. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of this stuff, only, you recognize what the film school generation stuff was all about, because we're talking about the 60s and the counterculture movement. And all of the madness that was going on at that time, assassinations and so forth, the triumph of women's liberation associated with a sexual revolution. Movies now, well, you know what movies do now, so we don't have to go through that. Also, the images of women are there, the images of youth, images of race, in which they dealt more directly than with problems with women and youth issues. The exploitation films, blaxploitation, a crazy short-lived cycle of black action movies that came roughly in 3 years, and the changes in the rating system, obviously. And that's about it. The new wave, you know that, and blah, blah. We don't need to go through all of this. There's that horizontal control, but I think what you'll know is that you're going to find everything you need in the study guide, and you're going to be really happy with the study guide, and I think everybody's going to make it. And I was going to show you a movie on this thing, but the machine doesn't work. So I'm going to say Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and all that sort of stuff, and thanks, and see you around. Bye. And they're playing the music, so it should be over.
Lane Online. Learn, unlearn, relearn.